Where do you think you're going? Well, I'm not going that way. It's much too rocky.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time. My name is Gareth and this is a channel called Book Songs and Other Magic. It's mostly about books, and this is another book review. It's another book review of an Adrian Tchaikovsky book. So clearly Adrian Tchaikovsky is working for me. This is the 8th book I've read by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and there is a spectrum. So the 2 novellas I read aren't as strong as the novels I've read, I think, but I absolutely love his work. He's a fantastic writer, and people are a little bit skeptical of how much he produces, but he says in interviews that he treats it like a full-time job. And when he first went full-time, he was a bit doubtful that he'd be able to just commit like a 9-to-5 thing to writing, but he does, and he gets a lot done in that time. And I think that's kind of realistic. If you're really good at honing your craft and having a system of how to get your outline together quickly and those kind of things, he can definitely write. So I don't think it's a very valid criticism to say that, oh, well, if he's writing that many books, they can't be any good, which I have heard from somebody who calls himself an expert. So I don't think that's true. I just don't think that's the thing. So yeah, I think he's fantastic. And I first came to know about him because of Children of Time. So I had randomly picked up a few of his fantasy books, but hadn't read them before I picked this up. And he actually started by writing fantasy. He goes back to fantasy sometimes, but he's writing mostly science fiction now. But he started writing fantasy. But this was the thing that really put his name on the map. Children of Time in 2015. It got many awards, and it's just ridiculous. This book is so brilliant. It's I don't know, one of the closest things I can think of to a perfect book. There are some other books in my head, I've put them as a bigger favourite. I've put this in my top 3 of all time, but to be honest, as a book, as a piece of work, it's probably a bigger achievement than the other 2 that I always put ahead of it, kind of for personal taste. But I think the craftsmanship in this book is ridiculous. It's a huge book, and there is not a wasted page in it. It's got so many different levels. It discusses so many different things, and it's just beautifully written. So this came out in 2015, and this really put his name on the map. And he's been churning out tons of books ever since then. And I don't say that in a negative sense. I think it's a brilliant thing because he's a brilliant writer. So I want to talk about Service Model today. So Service Model came out in 2024. Last year. It came out at the same time as another one. I think they were like a month apart in being released, which is Alien Clay, which I've already reviewed on my channel. And that's a very interesting book that, again, has got a very different kind of world building to his other books. But the thing with this book that I think is definitely worth tackling pretty soon into this review is that this is my 8th Tchaikovsky book, and it's the most different out of all the books that I read by him. It's very different. It's brilliant. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, so I was thinking, oh, is it 4 stars? No, it's a 5 stars. I thought it was brilliant. I think it's really well put together, and it kept me reading. I thought some of it was funny. Alex Unabridged has been praising Adrian Tchaikovsky on his channel, and he keeps talking about Tchaikovsky's humour. And all these other books I've read, whenever he said that, I thought, I'm not really feeling that much humour from his books. They're not dry, so I think that might be something that I'm just loving on a kind of a surface level, and it's not going in. That there's wit there, which I always want, that kind of wit in authors' voices anyway. But Alex always talks about it, and I always think, I'm not really sure, but this is definitely much more humorous than those previous, what I consider to be more serious books, like the Children of Time series and the other ones I've read. So, this is, in an interview, after I read this, I looked up a couple of interviews with Adrian Tchaikovsky, and he said that this is the closest he'll get to writing like Douglas Adams. And I thought that was a really interesting thing for him to say, not for the obvious reasons that people might be drawing parallels to Douglas Adams when they're reading it, But it's interesting for me because I was drawing parallels to Robert Sheckley. I kept thinking, oh, this really feels like Robert Sheckley. And Robert Sheckley, if you know my channel, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that Robert Sheckley is definitely one of my favourite authors of all time. It's someone I collect religiously. I'll buy anything that I see by him, and I've got multiple copies of some things. And recently I actually rebought a book that is getting a little tatty that I found again. It's one of my favourite Robert Sheckley books. And he's brilliant, but he's very distinctive in his style of writing, and lots of his books have got this sort of character being pulled about in different places, and the character's kind of confused, and there's a lack of agency in what the character's doing. There's no absence of agency, but there's a lack of agency. He feels like he's been pulled along in this absurd journey that he's taking, and that level of absurdity is huge. And that's the thing about Robert Sheckley's writing. That's true for Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's series. But I was thinking about, well, what is the difference? Why do I feel like this is more Robert Sheckley than Douglas Adams? And I think it's because Douglas Adams' absurdism in the Hitchhiker's series is more random, whereas with Robert Sheckley's stuff, it's often like circular reasoning, circular conversations where they just keep going around in circles, and whenever you try and go into a different direction, it comes back to the same thing again, and there's this sort of pointlessness and absurdity to the conversations. Like thinking about the theatre of the absurd, that it's kind of like that with science fiction tropes and science fiction journeys, traveling to different planets, and the mission, or not the mission, the plot is often absurd itself. But it's the way that the conversations and the specific parts of the scene are built up in this book that reminds me of Robert Sheckley specifically. So that's kind of an interesting thing that I noticed, especially when he quotes, well, not quotes, but he refers to Douglas Adams in the interview. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's been described by Adrian Tchaikovsky himself as Mad Max if C-3PO was the main character in it. Which is a little bit of a reveal, because when I read this, all I knew about it was that I've kind of read the bit at the beginning here, this little bit here, and it told me that Charles, the robot, the valet robot, kind of butler kind of character, he murders his master right at the beginning, and because of that, I thought the book was going to be about that and the consequences of him murdering his master, and I didn't know anything else, so I don't really want to say too much beyond that in this review, because I don't want to spoil the spoilers for you if you are going to read this, but I'll try and give you a sense of it, and I'll refer to some things, so I hope it doesn't spoil it too much. And there's a huge reveal at the end, which I definitely won't reveal, which kind of ties it all together anyway. So it's got a very neat plot in the sense that the strands are explained and that kind of thing, which I think is why it's novel length, because I read another review after I read it saying it's criticised it for being too long, but it's not actually that long, and I don't think it is too long. I think it explores the characters really well, and the ending is as long as it is because it's quite an important and big thing it's discussing. So let's talk about robotics for a minute. So clearly you're not supposed to murder your master, right, as a robot. So the 3 laws of robotics from Asimov is definitely something that a lot of authors have bounced off, and a lot of the science fiction community has bounced off. It's a very staple part of robotic law. And there is this sense that he's done something heinous that he can never kind of live with. He can't process properly. There's something wrong with his programming, something wrong with his processes that meant he did this. All the way through the book, he's confused about why he did it. But the confusion is a very rational one. You know, all the way through this, Charles keeps insisting that he doesn't have emotions. And also the third person narration also insists that it's not through an emotional reaction, it's a rational reaction, like, how did this happen? This shouldn't have happened. And I think that's another thing that kind of adds this wit to the book as well. And there's this passive incompetence all the way through this, with all of the robotics and AI that you see in this book. And that is because society is breaking down. I've already said there's a Mad Max element to this, and society has massively broken down, and there are a lot less humans. The robotic element of society has definitely taken over, but it's also not functioning properly, and it is revealed why at the end, but it's just brilliantly done. So yeah, the whole planet is in pieces, and anyway, I won't say how it relates to the plot, but anyway, he murders his master at the beginning, and all the way through the book, he is searching for purpose. Charles is searching for he's released from his job as a valet, funnily enough, and he's sort of sent out into the world, and he goes off to do a diagnostics check first, and the diagnostics check element of the book is the Kafkaesque part where the absurdity is at its probably highest level in the whole book. And you know, I've referred to Kafka there because Tchaikovsky does, but again, I can refer to Robert Sheckley there because that kind of nonsense that happens when he tries to get a diagnostics check is the sort of thing you see a lot in Sheckley's work. So again, nobody's mentioning Sheckley because for some reason he's in all these encyclopedias of science fiction. He's known in the science fiction fraternity, but nobody ever talks about him, which is a little bit of a shame. But anyway, that Kafkaesque element is hugely a big part of this second chapter. And that's when he's trying to get some sort of answers to how he could have murdered his master. And that's also when he meets the Wonk. And the Wonk is a really interesting character. She is put in this as an opposite. So she's full of energy. She's full of opinion. She's got this really strong drive to find answers. And he has got a drive to find a new job, but he's confused by these lack of answers. So it's not like this huge drive to get answers like it is for the Wonk. And there's these polar opposites in character and style of dialogue and style of how they're placed in the room, all sorts of things like that. Very, very much opposites. And that works really well. So yeah, that's a big part of the success of the book, I think, the relationship between those two. And there's a bit in the book, this won't be a spoiler, there's a bit in the book where they're split apart and you're always wanting them to get back together again because that dynamic is the best bit about the book. So, yeah. Okay, so I need to talk about one thing that I did read about, thankfully, after I read the book, because I was curious to see, you know, how it was received. And there's a reference to the fact that the 5 parts of this book are referenced by Tchaikovsky in relationship to other authors. So this, for example, part 3 has 4WL or Forwell or Orwell. So these numbers are this code. It's like a code that represents another author, right? So I've got another one in here. I've probably got another one just here somewhere. Let's try and find it. Yeah, clearly that's a bit more obvious. That's Dante. So he uses this code to make a reference to what's happening. But so you've got Kafka there. Kafka. That's what I mean by him referring to other authors. So the first one is Christ or Christie, Agatha Christie, because the first part is when you get the murder of his master. And that makes perfect sense. Absolutely get that. The Kafka one makes perfect sense because you've got this Kafkaesque lack of agency, this nonsense that you get sometimes in like things like The Trial. And everywhere he goes, there doesn't seem to be an answer to what's happening, and they're just lifelessly waiting in queues forever and ever and ever. And there's a sense that 20 years' time, the situation in that diagnostics area is going to be exactly the same. So that sort of thing is a reference to that. But the Orwell section expands out into what's happening in the world a little bit more. And the section that he's linked to Borges is a little bit of a funny one, because he's known for creating magical realism, and there is no magical realism in it, but there is a big library in it. And I wonder if it's a reference to a famous short story by Borges about memory, and how the memory is it's such a... He explores in this story a man who has perfect memory, can remember absolutely everything. And I think that could be a reference to the fact that that section of the book is mostly about the library that they go to. The Dante one, I think it just might be that it all comes together and it's all a bit hellish. So it could be that kind of thing, referring to the Inferno. When anyone refers to Dante, they're probably referring to the Inferno. But yeah, so he does that, but it doesn't get in the way. I don't think it gets in the way of the book, because it doesn't actually change the way it's written. So there's a consistency through the way it's written that's inconsistent to other Tchaikovsky books. So it has its own style that I think is really good and consistent through the book. So I think that works really, really well. There's also, I think, a really cool bit, which I can't remember which section it's in. It's either it must be the fourth section. I think it's the fourth section. Where they're in a war zone, and there's some really good comments about the futility of war and the nonsense surrounding some of the processes of war, some of the characteristics of war, with these weapons and vehicles that are in it, that are and the king the king of the book is fantastic, actually. The king that is part of this conflict in the book, you can see that it goes quite far in its journey. This king in this conflict, this fantastic character, and that's another high point in the book as well, this whole war zone thing. So yeah, it's kind of funny, but also very poignant. It says some good, interesting things about war, and there are some references to nowadays as well, I think, because the thing with the library, the wonk is really keeps stressing how important the library is, and library records. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously in the USA at the moment, that's being threatened by what the current administration thinks is worth keeping, or needs to be changed, or needs to be removed, and that kind of thing. So records, government records, is really, really important, and that's kind of stressed in this as well, which is I think it's really good. There's a couple of references to the Wizard of Oz in the book, and I think that's really nice, because there's a light touch to this, much lighter than his other books, but there is this sense of innocence in the book that refers back to the Wizard of Oz, and the wonk refers to Charles occasionally as Tin Man, and there's this sense that, and also later on, I won't tell you why because it'll be spoiling things, but there's a reason why there's an element of somebody behind a curtain. Don't go behind the curtain, which is obviously referencing the man behind the curtain, the wizard in the Wizard of Oz. So those kind of things are really cool as well. So there's lots of elements to this, and it all comes together really well. I think this is definitely one of my favourite Tchaikovsky books. I think it was really, really good. And a bit of a surprise as well, because obviously once I'd read 7 books up to this point, I was expecting a certain kind of book, and the fact it's so different is really interesting. So all of his books are different in the sense of the world building and sometimes the point of the book, but the plot is obviously going to be different. But with this, everything's different except the quality. So there we are. Hopefully I've not spoiled too much. I've desperately tried not to spoil too much, but I've talked a little bit about the 5 sections and referring back to this idea that he's linked it to authors, but I haven't given you too much plot. Ultimately, he goes on a journey to find a new place of work, and he's with this person called the Wonk after the 2nd chapter, and she's on a different mission, and both of them are trying to deal with this hugely broken down society. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. But what do I know? Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay curious.
Picture of what it's like to be